Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today is July 15th, and this is another of our bi-weekly SIG CLI meetings. My name is Maciej, and I'll be your host today. Our agenda is packed, so let's get right into it. A couple announcements. We have our monthly box crop call next Wednesday, July 22nd at the exact same time. So if you're interested in, or if you're looking for first-time issues, this is a perfect call to be on. We will be going through the bugs, through PRs, and helping to solve some issues. Another topic that I wanted quickly to bring up is the KubeCon EU. 2020 is happening in slightly over a month. It is entirely virtual, so you are all more than welcome to join. And we will be, I linked the full schedule, and we will be having a session there that I'll be recording in slightly over a week or so. That's the requirements from the organizers. And my question to y'all is, what are people interested in seeing in that call? And I was thinking that maybe, because the most frequently answered questions that we have is why there is this, what is the move to staging? Because this is our biggest effort that we are currently undergoing. Why we are using alt customize, a quick overview how a proper kubectl command looks like, which is both helpful for reviewers and first-time contributors. And probably that's about it. I have about 20-25 minutes. I think that should be enough to cover the three main topics, aside from the general overview of the SIG. Does anyone have any other suggestions that what I should put there? Okay, if you can come up with something in the near couple of days, ping me on Slack with your ideas. I'll be more than happy to add them. If I remember correctly, my recording is planned for next Tuesday or so. So if you come up with something until that date, I'm more than happy to hear some suggestions that I can add. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic. And Brian brought it up about a week ago, the topic of periodic E2E. Brian, you want to take it away from here?
Yeah, sure. This is something that I wasn't really too aware of. I mean, I'm sure some of you guys are, but for me, it was something that I didn't really know about until I started digging into it. So I was looking at E2E test flakes and really looking at the triage dashboard and noticing some tests that were failing all the time, and kind of raised some questions. So I'm really kind of looking at it from two ways, like how do we fix the test? So I'm kind of working on that right now as far as a separate thing, but really looking at the jobs, I noticed some things that seemed kind of odd. Some of them ran every hour, every 2 hours, and some of them ran every 12 hours. The jobs typically take like an hour to run. So running it every hour, and when it takes an hour is constantly running. So I don't know if these are jobs that are not part of the, so let me back up. There's, some of you know this, so my apologies, but there's pre-submit, post-submit, and periodic jobs that run. So these are the jobs that are not part of the pull request, but they just run on a scheduled basis. And the idea is they're testing things like, do older versions of kubectl work with newer versions of the cluster? So it's testing skew and some other things. And the idea is that it would alert us if there's a problem, and then we can go fix the issue, but it's not part of every pull request. So a couple questions, and I've kind of put them in the notes here, but how frequently should these run? I feel like 1 hour or 2 hour might be too frequently given the load on the test servers right now. And then who should be notified? So like right now, only some of the jobs have an alert email set up. It looks like they go to Kubernetes SIG CLI on call at gmail.com. So I'm sure that's, I don't know if that's Mache or or what. Uh, so
Honestly, that I have no idea what that email is, and I'm quite sure that this is probably some kind of a dev null currently because nobody is monitoring that one. I did take a peek before the call. I ran out of time looking too deeply. But to answer your first question, probably something around 12 or 24 hours. So basically running this once, at most twice a day with the velocity that we have is a sufficient delay between being notified when something breaks and when it gets into the lands in the queue, because we can, in the worst case, all we have is to look through PRs that are merged in the past 12 or 24 hours if we're looking in the long run for this to be always green. So unless anyone have any particular preference, I would start with 24 hours for starters. That seems reasonable granulation. And I definitely agree that running this every single hour or even every 2 hours is pointless. So
My
yeah.
guess on why some of those intervals may have been set is I think years ago there were some pretty flaky E2E jobs, and what would happen at release time is to get a good signal, you couldn't say, oh, like I expect every one of the past 20 tests to have passed or something like that, right? And so what you'd need to do is just like you'd run it 10 times and then say, did it flake once? And then you can get within a couple of days, you can get a good signal. Whereas if you ran it once a day, then you'd have to look at like the last, month to see like of passes, which doesn't tell you the right information. So yeah, if these are consistently passing once a day, seems good.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's still quite a bit of flakiness in EDE tests in general. So I think that's a valid point. I don't know how flaky these particular tests are, but I know some are really flaky. So maybe,
with that,
so I think maybe one thing to look at is like during release time, you should be able to look at maybe the last like 3 days of test signal and get like a clear signal from that, even if there's some flakiness in there. Would be just something to keep in mind when we're tuning the intervals.
So maybe 24 is okay if it passes every 2 or 3 times at least. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think yeah.
We can go with something around 6 or 12 in that case. This will give us more frequency, but not too frequently, probably. So 6 or 12, that will give you about 2 or 4 hours per 2 or 4 times per day. That's sufficient signal, and but definitely not more frequently. If we get to the point where we are certain this is green always, then we can reconsider bumping the intervals to 24 hours maybe for starters.
Have we set up recent skew tests, like which version against which version? I don't think we've done that for a long time.
Yeah, those tests were not looked at as good as we should. So
I've been looking at.
To Brian.
Oh, sorry. I've been looking at those skew tests recently, and I have a separate PR out to handle that. But the way the skew tests are set up, it looks like it's an automatic thing when the versions get bumped. It's not something that I don't think that we have to update every version. I might be wrong there, but I think it looks like it when I don't know if it's the release team or whatever else, but it just takes a generically named, it names things like stable 1, stable 2, and then in beta and current, I guess. So it's like current is the current, and then beta is, it's kind of weirdly named, but beta is the last version. Stable 1 is 2 versions ago, and stable, so like they just rebuild those images and tag them that way, and then our tests will run against those for skew.
It might be that the release automation is handling those, as well as removing the unsupported versions.
All right, so I guess I'll put down here that we'll start with 12 hours. If that ends up being not enough, we can go down to 6. If it works well, then we can think about going to 24.
Yeah,
is that okay?
All right. That's a good starting point. And to answer the second question, the email, definitely that on-call that I've seen. Oh yeah, that's the one. That's not good, because I have no idea where that's going. I've noticed that we are being notified in the release team, in one of them at least. So I would probably go with our mailing list for starters. If we see that there's too much of the notification, we can either create a separate mailing list just for that, or what I would hope for in the long run, we will be able to limit the amount of the failures such that those notifications will be rare enough that they are perfectly fine being targeted at the at our main mailing list. So I would just go with Kubernetes SIG CLI for starters.
All right, cool. And then I guess, and those are the main two things, but the last thing is, I don't know how many people here use Test Grid to look at things, but it seems like, I guess that's a general question. Do people use Test Grid? It seems like we could unify or improve some of the way that things are displayed in Test Grid. Anybody have any thoughts on that, or do you care?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
I was just gonna say, like, are you proposing, like, do you have like specific things, ideas around improving this, or is it just a general comment?
I guess it's just a general comment. I think I was looking at the Test Grid, and it seemed like some things were not. I don't know. I don't remember what I was thinking there. I think I was looking at it and thought that it didn't look like things were in the right place, and I was curious if people use Test Grid or if that was, I guess, any thoughts on that, I guess. And maybe there's nothing that needs to be done there.
I think, like, if you can think of a way, if there's some way you think that we could, arrange the test results, like having other aggregate views or something, sure, I'd be very open to that. If you're talking about like the CSS on the Test Grid page, then maybe the Test Grid team is the people to talk to.
No, I was thinking more like just the naming of the tabs that the things in the YAML file. So I'll probably do a PR with these changes, and I'll look at them to see if they make sense, but I probably won't change them unless they don't make sense. But I think I don't know what I was thinking on the last point there, but I think the first two clarifications give me some direction on that.
I'm pretty sure that there's some well thought out meaning behind the naming. Honestly, with my tenure with the project, the majority of them are somewhat readable for me, because they usually are about the type of a cluster, the version, and what they are doing. So it's either skew cluster latest kubectl table 1 GCE, or eventually they're just GCE serial, which means all of the serial tests. So definitely mixing the serial and the rest should be as is. For those that are unfamiliar with what's the difference is the majority of the E2E in Kubernetes are run in parallel, which means when we set up a cluster for every PR, we are running in parallel, I don't know, 20 or 30 tests at the same time. But there are some tests that require to be run in serial, and they are usually tagged similarly to where we have those tags in the square brackets. There's a square brackets serial in the test name. They are very rare, and there's not that many of them because obviously it requires a lot more time to run them. So I'm not sure if we have that many of them, too. And they are related to taints, which obviously modify how the cluster behaves. So it's perfectly fine that they are part of the serial test. I would keep them distinct, serial from the parallels, that's for sure. And then somehow, allowing us to fit in with the rest of the people, because we are not the only ones looking at the test grid. That's the first thing that we need to remember. I don't have any objections in cleaning, but as long as we will fit in with the naming schemes that were already in a project and set up by someone else. Because if something that might make sense for us right now, not necessarily will be readable by others in a couple of days, in a couple of weeks. So, but I don't see any objections if you notice that there are some pointless, or maybe there are groups where there's nothing going on at all. I wonder if there's anything happening in the AWS, and from what I see, there's nothing. Not sure if we even run AWS tests still. So probably if there are some duplicates or something like that, I don't see any objections in cleaning them.
Okay, that's great.
As long as it makes sense, yeah, I'm all for it.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about this one before we move on to the next topic? Okay, going on. Sean, this is a topic from last time, but you weren't here, so we bumped it over to this week. This week, kube controller drain should have an option not to carbon the node. You want to talk about it?
Sure. I'll and hopefully the dog will stop barking. Sorry about that.
No,
yeah. So actually, I'm pretty sure this came up just in the bug scrub, and I think I might have volunteered to bring this to the entire community to see if this was something that actually sounded reasonable. I don't have as much experience with drain, and generally, my understanding is that cordon is it's gonna keep things from going onto a node, and drain is one step further. It's not only keeping things from going onto a node, but it's gonna kick everything off. And so does this even make any sense? Would we want to drain without cordoning? We want to kick everything off and not say you can't schedule anything on it again. Does anybody have any experience with this? Does this make sense?
honestly, thinking about it, I've been playing with drain several times. I don't recall using cordon, but just thinking about it from a user point of view, it's hard for me to figure out a use case where I'm draining a node and I don't want to cordon it. Because basically the goal of draining a node is you want to take it down for maintenance, upgrade, whatever. And without coordinating that node first, the drain will be racing with the scheduler, which will be trying to schedule pods, maybe even the exact same that you just drained, back to the node because of, let's say, for example, there's a daemon set which is running on all the nodes, and you're draining your node, including those daemon sets. You're removing the pod, and the scheduler then looks at the pod. Oh, I mean, the daemon sets controller will figure out, oh, there's a node that sounds healthy, and I should probably create a pod back on it, which means,
Yeah, I was worried about that what sounds like dysfunctional dynamic of, you know, kicking everything off and still allowing it open so that the scheduler starts throwing stuff on as things are being kicked off. So if we click on there's a PR that's talked about. If we look further down, that is actually implementing this. I'm it's still open. I'm considering putting a hold on it. So maybe this isn't something that the entire SIG needs to be in on. I just wanted to get anybody else's expertise if anybody else wanted to comment on this. As it stands now, from what I understand, I'm going to put a hold on this and describe this as probably not a very healthy situation. If anybody wants to chime in with some other points, then please do.
yeah, Phil, go ahead.
My guess from reading the original issue description is that they want to remove remove some set of pods from the node and then taint it and then allow it only to be scheduled for some other set of pods or something of that nature. And so maybe instead of a general drain command, what they're really looking for is remove pods from taint and remove or something like that. So it might be worth just thinking about this as a separate command, which would, apply the taint and then remove nodes that don't, or remove pods that aren't then scheduled to it or something, and then you wouldn't be in the problem you just described.
Yeah,
that was my question. So if you taint a node and pods are scheduled on it that don't match the taint, they're never going to leave, right? Unless they're evicted for some other reason.
Yeah, that is correct, because currently the way we have the scheduler written is that after the node is scheduled, something has to remove the pod, and that something could be a descheduler. There is a descheduler. It's one of the sub projects from SIG scheduling that can be run periodically, and it will go through your cluster and to be able to either balance it or remove pods that do not match the current taints for whatever reason. So there are options.
Maybe this should be part of the taint command then.
I mean, I'm perfectly fine with doing what Sean said. Hold the PR, and in the original issue, ask the author for the particular use case that they are targeting, because the author did not stated the actual use case that they are having, that they want to address. Without knowing that, it's just a wishful thinking, and we could come up with at least X million possible options why he wants to do it this way or the other way. I would just ask, what is the use case, and then we can reconsider whether it makes sense to do it the way he wants it to be done, or maybe we just need to direct him that there is something else that he should be doing. Does anyone else have any other suggestions about that one? Okay, hearing none. Let's move on to the next one. Eddie, we started the discussion last time about the patterns discussion. You want to continue the topic? I need to recall what we talked about last time. Oh yeah, historical reason for complete validated run. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, let's bump this till next time.
Okay, sure, no worries.
I didn't prepare anything, sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Okay, I'm gonna move with several topics that I noted over the past week or so. So there was a discussion that I had about whether the kubectl plugins are GA. I think when we originally created that with Huan over a year ago or so, we started that as an alpha, or the initial was alpha, and the current design was beta. That's how we did it. But we never promoted it as a GA. Not sure if there's something more than just updating docs. Honestly, I can't remember whether we did it. And my ask was to the rest of the SIG, are there any particular issues that you know of that are stopping us from GAing kubectl plugins? Honestly, I need to check the docs. Maybe we did GA that one. Or maybe it is GA already. I need to double check that one. And I'll bring that one back probably. Because I'm not sure if anyone else knows. Okay, I have two other topics related to particular commands. So some time ago, I wanted to get rid of another deprecated functionality in, I'm not sure if that's kubectl or that's client Go. Oh, that's client Go, which basically does defaulting of the Kubernetes master. And currently it is always defaulting to localhost. Unfortunately, this broke a lot of stuff. Namely, it is impossible to do any of the local commands with kubectl. So for example, if you do kubectl label override pointing to a file, and you explicitly specify -- local true, which means that you should not contact the server, but you should work locally with the resources that you specified. And of course, that broke due to the removal of that default. I went through the code, and the pieces where it is breaking is where we are creating the client, because if you go through the several hoops, how we are creating clients, whenever we're creating clients in complete, we need to have a valid kubeconfig. If there's no kubeconfig or there's no Kubernetes master, kubectl will complain that it doesn't have a kubeconfig, and for local, it should not require one. So there are two possibilities how we could approach this one. Either have some kind of a more systematic approach so that it will work out of the box across all of the commands, or we'll go through each and every single command And in complete, we will do a conditional not to create clients whenever local is specified. And I'm not in fond of the latter solution because it's super cumbersome and it was very error prone. And I wanted to ask what others think about it. And let me quickly bring what I'm talking about. This call or this will literally fail because of missing kubeconfig, even with the local specified. So yeah. Does anyone have any suggestions about it? Do you
We're just
guys?
talking about how to make the code
Sorry?
work.
No,
Like, is the
So if you chase down the rabbit hole through dynamic client and how we're building client, at some point in time, you will get to this piece of code, which is getting the default server. And with the default server in, it will magically just works and it will think that it has a valid kubeconfig pointing to localhost. And so it has theoretically is able to create a connection, and it does create a connection, but it never used that connection because with a local inside of label, for example, the builder is wired properly and it will never use the connection to the server. When the server is not defaulted, meaning that I remove the deprecated functionality from here, the client cannot be created and you are basically getting an error that you are missing or there's an incomplete kubeconfig, even when you specify the local flag. So we would have to either condition all the client creation incomplete across all of the commands, or we would need to figure out a better way for creating those clients in a more, I don't know, systematic approach so that we don't have to manually do that across all of the commands.
what is the local use for like Open API and discovery? Does it simply not need those things?
Yeah, it doesn't need. It will just, usually the local is combined with the resource builder, and it will just go through the files and do whatever you want to do with them locally. Yeah, it's suggesting that there is a logic to determine whether the error is lack of kubeconfig. Is dry run client equals to local? Yes, I think so. Although dry run client, not quite. Dry run client will use the connection to the server when getting the resources. It will not invoke anything onto the server. Local does not even connect to the server except for the place when it tries to create the connection, which basically means local is broken currently. Yeah, figuring that there is lack of kubeconfig. Yeah, but that still means we would have to go through each and every single command, and I'm trying not to do it per command, but rather trying to figure out a better systematic way that we could handle
So the
that
reason we have this problem, I think, is because we try and create the client when it isn't used. Is that correct? And the reason this is going to be the fix is relatively simple. Like if there's just one command, which is only create the client if it's used.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we have like this code to create a client and then like pass it around, replicate it across 24 commands or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so like the quote unquote right way to fix this, I would naively think is that sounds like code smell. Anyway, if we have like a bit of logic that's duplicated over 24 places, that all need to be changed together. And so like it might be worth before, like instead of just trying to solve, like doing a code cleanup ahead of time to say, okay, like how are we initializing dependencies, and maybe look a little more holistically at that, because today it's this client and tomorrow it's some other dependency, right? That needs to be changed everywhere. So if we can factor those out,
Yeah.
have that be its own work, then it should be a simple change after that.
Yeah, that's basically what I was hoping to get to. So that is the long run tool for this approach that I would like to see somehow solved. If anyone is willing to spend his time on figuring out the best approach, I'll be more than happy to review ideas from people.
So is anyone on the call either a new contributor or know someone in their organization or their professional network that is looking for a onboarding task, and this seems like the right level of difficulty for?
Hi, I am looking for to contribute. I am new to SIG CLI.
There we go. All right.
Yeah.
Why don't you get hooked up, Mache, afterwards, and maybe you could try taking this one on. How's it sound? Oh.
Yeah, definitely. I can also send an email to SIG CLI. I will be also noting down the issues that people might be interested in working on for first timers. I'm working with, I can't remember the name. I think it's Yao. With Yao and Aurelien on removing the generators from the create commands. They're doing the heavy lifting. I'm just reviewing their PRs. And Yao created a Uber issue for track this work. I'll try to get all of those issues listed out, and I'll add that one as well to that email, so that first of all we can point people to where they could start, and eventually sync with whom to sync with that is currently working on it, or who is the approver. I'll try to create such a list and create the necessary issues. There's also this crazy idea that I just come up with as an immediate solution for this particular problem. I started wondering whether local at all makes sense for people to use. And maybe it's a artifact of the past that as part of the overall cleaning of the commands, we should maybe rethink and remove those as well. because local is nothing more than, oh, I have this deployment file locally, and I want to, in that particular example, add some labels onto it, or annotations, or probably the commands that we are trying not to encourage people to use. It is completely opposite of using the DevOps approach and the kubectl apply. Just some food for thoughts if people want to think about it. And the final topic that we got, and I had a discussion with Jordan, Brian, and I can't remember who, is there was PR about a week or 2 weeks ago where people want to have support for global flags in kubectl options. Currently, the way we have plugins is that when we are processing parameters, when we notice a flag, we stop processing the commands, which means all the arguments for a plugin needs to be passed after the command. So you need to do kubectl foo dash and namespace dash whatever. But with create, for example, or whichever built-in kube commands, you can do kubectl dash and namespace create something, which means you can mix the commands with the arguments, and kubectl, the built-in commands, will work just fine. There was a PR, and after the discussion that I had with Jordan last week, short before the code freeze, we put a hold on that one because it was changing the default behavior. And one of the reasons was that it is hard to justify whether the value that you're working on is an argument to a flag, or it's a flag that does not accept arguments, or it's a command name. And if I remember correctly, Jordan pointed to a specific comment that he had. I need to figure out where was it. Maybe that was this and that. There was a, yeah. So the question is, if people feel that us supporting only the current approach, is it problematic for the plugins? Because if you read through all the links that I pointed there along the issue and the agenda, it is pretty reasonable to not to extend to global flags being supported in the plugins. It seems there's.
I think there's like two. Sorry, do you mind if I interrupt you, Ajay?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think there's like two parties here. Like one is, as a kube control user who may be running a plugin, I may specify -- config or context or whatever, and it's possible that the plugin is one that talks to the cluster and obeys that, like recognizes that flag. And for other commands that are not plugins, that flag would be like propagated to the command because it's a global flag or something like that, right? Even if it came before the command. And so when I provide that flag, it silently does the wrong thing because I think that the flag is being provided, but it's like not actually being provided to the command, and then I may be surprised. And in theory, I could even you could even do the wrong thing, like apply something to the wrong cluster if it's like a apply-ish sort of plugin or something like that, right? Then you got like the plugin authors, right, and kind of the technical limitations of making such a thing possible, right, which is the command may not support that flag, right, and may do strict flag validation. I think Amit left a comment about this, right, in which case passing in would cause the command to fail, or it may not take that flag and it may not do strict argument validation, and in which case it may not work. It may just silently ignore that or these sorts of things, right? And so the like reconciling those two differences is like, what do we want? Like we want the person passing the global flag to effectively know that it's not being passed to the plugin. And I think what they're asking for is that it just gets past the plugin and just magically works. But the, you know, with the constraints, that's not possible. So one thing I suggested somewhere in this, one of these issues is just for plugins, like fail if any global flags are specified, and then at least the user knows that there's not supported.
I mean, to answer your first question or statement, that if you specify a global flag, for example, context or namespace, and it does not get applied properly within a command, the way we currently invoke the commands from within kubectl, the plugins from within kubectl, we do not enforce anything at a global element. We leave all of the client creation, context, picking the right config file, picking the right context, picking the namespace. Everything is up to the plugin author. What we do is we provide the plugin authors with the libraries that allow them to consume those built-in flags such as config, context, namespace, and whatnot, to be able to build on top of that functionality that we have already built in kubectl. So whatever happens with whatever you do with the global options, it still has to be applied at the plugin level. Maybe the thing is that we are just missing a proper explanation within our docs how the plugins are working, both from developer perspective as well as the user perspective. I need to have a look what Ahmed wrote there.
So I think there is one nuance to this, that if you look at the original issue 884, the problem that this original issue reporter said was they had an alias defined for kubectl that had the namespace in the alias, and then they tried to call a plugin, and so they had like -in names, -in with no need, with a space, and then the namespace name, and then their plugin, and it failed because it can't interpret any flags that come before the plugin. So it's the order of the flags too that is causing a problem.
Like, how important is this? Right. So like the answer, right, is okay, put it after the plugin, right? And that's just the way you specify these things, right? Is there like a compelling need to support this particular UX?
I mean, I think it's for people that define aliases.
Yeah. Other
But
than
they define the alias. wrong, right? Like define your alias differently and it will work. Or because is it because like the flag, if it's after the plugin doesn't parse
It's
arguments
before.
correctly?
It's before the plugin. They
I,
are
I
doing
mean, like,
kubectl.
so that the like, if is the response define your alias to put the thing after the plugin name, the flag after the plugin name?
So
Does
that way
that not
it
work?
doesn't become an alias. That becomes a bash function at that point. Aliases are just prefixes, right? So there's that.
Oh, I see. The kube control dash in some namespace is the alias, and then the plugin
Yes.
is what comes after that. Okay, I see. I see.
I think there was an ask some time ago about supporting namespace or context as an environment variable.
And the namespace, yeah, that was opened in 2016.
But that's
But
it does make sense with
namespace,
kubeconfig, but with namespace it's too tricky.
Mm-hmm.
You might destroy your cluster easily because you're not be aware which namespace you're actually working on.
Yeah. So we could probably like rearrange the global options that were passed before the plugin name to the end, but then the problem becomes, what if the plugin is parsing the flags themselves? Like the plugin, imagine, expects one argument, but you just gave it that one argument plus some more command line options. So some plugins might work out that way.
Right, that was the main issue, because from what I was checking Cobra, the majority of the Cobra flags that we have within kubectl, even when they are Boolean, they usually expect to have flag name and the value. It not necessarily can be true for the majority of the flags. You can have flags which are bools and it's still valid. Local, if you use -- local, for example, it's a Boolean flag, there's no value, and then can be flag, no value, again flag. And the parsing needs to be aware whether there is a value or if there is no value. And that becomes super tricky, and you might actually end up in a completely messed up world where you will be passing wrong arguments, wrong commands, or looking for wrong plugin names than you would originally expected. So it's super
one
tricky.
thing we could do is we could pass the environment, like these as environment variables to the subcommands, and then like not support environment variables at the kube control level, right? Or like at least make it difficult to provide like namespace as an environment variable for the reasons mentioned before.
Thing is, there are
And
already
then-
like 100 plugins that don't recognize those environment variables.
Right, but they wouldn't recognize this. Like, would they recognize this flag?
They wouldn't, but at least they would fail instead of, let's say, pointing to the wrong namespace and deleting the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, real quick on that. If we update the SDK and they update the dependencies, though, wouldn't they get all that for
There's
free?
there's no SDK. Yeah.
There is.
CLI
There
utils.
is an SDK. You might think people are using it, but most people are not using it or using it correctly. That's the thing.
I know.
Like SDK also doesn't give you an option to get even the namespace. Config is a good story, but namespace isn't.
Maybe what it comes down to is for the built-in commands with this global flag, we can say that if the command targets a namespace, that we can guarantee that namespace will be, or the flag value will be respected, right? But for plugins, the command may target a namespace, and there is no way for us to enforce that it respects the flag, and therefore this gives a false sense of security where you specify this alias, you think it's going to work against that namespace, and in fact, it does not.
Yeah. So
the answer becomes, there's don't
better
specify
docs.
an alias with this plugin, right? Like have a different alias for plugins or something like that, maybe.
And improve our docs to be explicit
So
about.
what if we arrange it to the end and assume plugins have good enough plugin command line argument parsing so they can say, hey, I don't support dash dash namespace. But the user can tell they use the dash dash namespace because they were using the alias. Is that a bad option? Like rearranging things to the end?
Yeah, that's a great option. I can't remember on the PR or the issue we talked about doing that, and that works well, except for, I think the only exception is that on like the namespace flag, you have to use equal sign. You can't say like, or well, I don't know if you have to, but it's hard to parse out flags if they don't have an equal. So you don't know whether what comes after the space is a plugin name or the argument. But I think that's probably a viable option if we just say, hey, that's a restriction. If you're going to put flags before a plugin name, you have to use equals. If you don't, then it's not going to work. Then just give them an error message or something. Say, you can't define flags this way before a plugin.
Isn't this what generic CLI options is supposed to solve? Like, shouldn't these plugins be pulling them in?
A lot of the plugins don't even talk to the API. They just do like some things on the local context, or they parse YAML files, or they rearrange fields or something like that. So that's why it doesn't solve that problem.
They may be written in Bash or Ruby or any other thing, right? So the generic CLI options only really works for Go plugins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I own the kubectl -aliases repo that has like 1,000 stars on it. It doesn't bother me this much. I'm not sure why it's bothering so many people. But yeah,
I'm leaning towards not to allow this. The restriction that Brian mentioned, although it's viable, is another restriction that we would just have to document, and it's only a matter of time when we would get an issue back with why there is this restriction. I want to remove that restriction, and we will be back at the same point where we are today. And I think what we need to do is to properly document the limitation of the design that we picked some time ago, and make it obviously documented properly, both for plugin authors and the users especially. Okay, I don't want to keep you too long. We're already 1 hour after that one.
Real quick, there was action items for the Corden issue. Did someone take that on to do that, or
For which issue? Sorry.
The drain and Corden issue?
Sean will be handling that one.
Okay.
So I assigned it to myself. I put a hold on it and asked for a better description of the use case. Does that sound? What do you think?
Yep.
What do you think, Eddie?
Yeah, I jive with that.
Okay. I'll update the agenda with the action items. Thank you very much. Sorry for the 2 minutes extra. See you in a week on our bug scrap. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. See you.